Minh Thúy xin kính chào quý vị hôm nay thứ Sáu, 9 tháng 8, 2024. Đến với VATV hôm nay gồm có phỏng vấn đặc biệt và nhạc lá bồ đề. Kính thưa quý vị, trong thời gian công tác ở Việt Nam, ông Frank Scotton đã được biệt phái công tác trong nhiều cơ quan khác nhau. Khi thì hoạt động với lực lượng đặc biệt, khi thì hoạt động với các nhân viên quân sự ở các ấp. Một trong những công tác biệt phái đặc biệt nhất của ông là làm việc với Giám đốc William Coby của CIA. Trong công tác đặc biệt này, ông được chỉ định thâu thập tin tức về các nhân viên Việt Nam. Việc chỉ định này vô tình khiến cho ông có cái nhìn chuyển hướng từ khung cảnh tác chiến sang tình trạng nhân sự. Việc thâu thập tin tức bắt đầu bằng việc kiểm chứng những tin đồn về việc tham nhũng. Lúc đầu, việc thâu thập tin tức chỉ là để tìm hiểu, nhưng về sau, khi tin tức thâu thập ngày càng nhiều, ông Frank Scotton và văn phòng CIA của Giám đốc William Coby bị buộc phải tìm cách đối phó với những thực tế thâu thập những dữ kiện đó. Công tác này dần dần cuốn hút Frank Scotton vào sâu trong nguồn máy hành chánh lẫn nguồn máy quân sự của Việt Nam. Ông nhận thấy ông không phải là người thích hoặc bị thu hút hoặc muốn giải quyết những vấn đề nan giải này. Nhưng vì đang nắm giữ gần như tất cả những tin đồn ở tất cả mọi nơi đang cần kiểm chứng, ông không thể rút lui. Xin mời quý vị cùng theo dõi công tác biệt phái của Frank Scotton qua những tiếp xúc của ông với Giám đốc CIA William Coby và tình trạng nan giải của vấn đề này càng bước sâu hơn vào những vấn đề ông không muốn giải quyết qua phần 11 phỏng vấn đặc biệt do Phan Lê Dũng, Võ Thành Nhân và Minh Thúy thực hiện.
Okay, Frank, I think we were touching on the different branches of different organizations within the government that couldn't share information with one another. And we think about the time that you were detailed with the CIA and you were setting up this so-called database for all of the officials in Vietnam about corruption. Tell us about the project.
Well, Bill Coby wanted me to do it with an emphasis on allegations of corruption involving people that had some responsibility for rural development funding, rural development funds. And so in the first instance, I was receiving, while I was in his office, information from American advisors. Mostly, it seemed, civilian advisors who were sensitive to this kind of thing. And a lot of it had to do with diversion of building supplies, for instance, rebar, concrete mix. And I would faithfully document the information and file it. The files were maintained in MACV at the time. There were two difficulties I felt with the approach. Given that it was better to have some information of this nature compared to no information, all right. But then as I discussed the expansion of the files in file cabinets with Bill Coby, I asked him, what were we going to do with this information? I understood that the information with respect to a district chief, let's say, who was diverting materials for his own benefit, that would be taken up with the Prime Minister's office, and you might well have, and in some instances you did have, transfer of a district chief, replacement. in other more serious cases involving, I felt more serious cases involving higher ranking government officials, including even, let's say, a cabinet minister, what was going to be done with that information. And since to the extent possible, given other needs for my time and tasking, to the extent that I had attempted to verify or grade the reliability of that information, what was going to be done with respect to a province chief or a corps commander or someone, let's say, who worked on the Central Pacification Committee out of the Prime Minister's office, or
even the Prime Minister
even,
himself.
let's say, someone within the Prime Minister's family.
Mm-hmm.
Despite our working together for some time, and I think considerable mutual respect, I never had a satisfactory answer to that. In practice, it seemed to be that documentable, provable allegation of corruption at a low level would be managed by change, removal from office. With respect to what might transpire at a higher level, it was ignorable, and in practice was ignored.
How do you actually go about it? How do you document? What do you have in the beginning before you coming into this corruption file? Is there anything there before? Is it your very initial thing that you have zero things?
I didn't find anything when I was asked to start.
And what year was that?
That was in 19. Let me see what that would have been. That would have been in 1970.
70. Okay.
Yeah, early 1970.
Early enough, because American just came in 68. You only had 2 years, and
Oh
you
no,
had,
we well.
I'm talking about Americanization of the war. I'm not talking about the whole effort.
The Americanization and the establishment of chords.
So 2 years.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how did you go initially about collecting this information? Who are the people working for you?
Well, initially, because I sorry to tell you, I had other interests and other duties too. I didn't have the interest in it that maybe perhaps someone might say I should have or I could have had. But right from the beginning, I thought there was going to be a contradiction in terms of what I would collect and what might be done about it. You know, secondly, I was certainly not going to be the person who was going to manage the consequences. You know, I was not going to be the person who would go to the Prime Minister's office. In the end, that was going to have to be Bill Colby who would do it. As far as I know, the information that I arranged in those files was not shared with the embassy either. I don't know that it may have been done so by someone else, but in terms of the expansion of those files, which had begun by, to some degree, by my predecessor, Everett Baumgartner, who had worked with Colby. It was at that point all low-level stuff involving, I would say, misappropriation of local resources. During the time that I handled it, the quantity, quality, and value of the problem expanded, and there were some allegations with respect to smuggling and other instances, but the files expanded, but they remained stagnant as far as I can tell in files. And there was one point where it seemed strange to me that we would be going to the Prime Minister's office to make a complaint about a district chief in Quezon, let's say, the Mekong Delta, who had misappropriated some refugee supplies, and we were doing so in the presence of a person on whom we had some documentation.
Minh Thúy xin kính chào quý vị hôm nay thứ Sáu, 16 tháng 8, 2024. Đến với VATV hôm nay gồm có phỏng vấn đặc biệt và nhạc lá bồ đề. Kính thưa quý vị, việc thu thập dữ kiện về các nhân viên Việt Nam soi sáng một phần cách làm việc của các cơ quan Hoa Kỳ. Khác với những suy nghĩ thường tình rằng tất cả những hoạt động của CIA đều phát xuất từ cơ quan hành pháp hoặc là lập pháp của Hoa Kỳ. Nhưng hoạt động như việc thu thập dữ kiện về những tin đồn về cách hoạt động đáng trách của các cơ quan dân sự, quân sự Việt Nam nhằm cải thiện nguồn máy hành chính và dân sự phát xuất là do sáng kiến của những nhân viên Mỹ hoạt động ở Việt Nam. Một suy nghĩ sai lầm khác là các hoạt động của CIA hoàn toàn mờ ám và thường phát xuất cho những mưu đồ thâm hiểm. Trong cuộc phỏng vấn kỳ này, mời quý vị nghe một câu chuyện về công trình thu thập tin tức tuy do người Mỹ khởi xướng đã bùng phát vì có sự ủng hộ mạnh mẽ của các nhân viên Việt Nam. Cũng như các nhân viên Mỹ, các nhân viên Việt Nam hy vọng hoạt động thăm dò lấy tin tức của họ sẽ đưa đến một kết quả cho nguồn máy hành chánh dân sự, quân sự nói riêng và nguồn máy quốc gia nói chung. Một hoạt động tuy có vẻ thầm lén, nhưng chẳng có gì đáng xem là những tin tức bí mật cần giấu giếm. Minh Thúy mời quý vị tiếp tục theo dõi hồ sơ nhân sự Việt Nam qua lời kể của ông Frank Scotton trong phần 12 phỏng vấn đặc biệt do Phan Lê Dũng, Võ Thành Nhân và Minh Thúy thực hiện.
Did you ever talk seriously with Coby before this project start? Like, who would be behind these things at first? So why was it all of a sudden an issue that wasn't an issue before, and it has to be?
I think because the reports started coming. The Chords organization, when it was saddled upon MACV, was the first time you had a countrywide collection of data on the part of personnel that were, for the most part, either civilian or heavily influenced by the Comer-Colby thinking about the need to improve the quality of life in the countryside, and even in parts of cities.
And do you think this decision is at the advisor level, the people in Vietnam, or is it something like congressional asking for accountability for the project?
I don't think it had anything to do with congressional, because had it been that, then I think at some point a visiting congressional representative would have asked for access or wanted to look at things, and to my knowledge it never happened. Now I have to say also that for me personally this was a minor
duty.
That Colby had asked me to take on. I had so many other things, and as he said during our initial discussion about whether I would work for him or not, he didn't expect to see me in the office every day. That I would be out and about and in other parts of the country and coming back. I tried. His secretary was named Tina Capazinas, and I tried to. If I was going to be in I-Corps, I would tell her I would be in I-Corps so she could reach me.
So were there a lot of Vietnamese playing supportive role in the collecting effort, information about
there
the corruption?
There was some, because there was an element in MACV called Pacification Studies Group, which had some significant Vietnamese employees, Do Minh Nhất being one of them, Tran Hu Chi, who survived and lives in the Atlanta, Georgia area, not in Atlanta. And many of those people were people who had begun with me during the period when I was with Special Forces. And I had ultimately about 60 or 70 Vietnamese cadre who undertook special missions around the country, some of them involving training, some of them other things. And we had them all, for a time some of them were on a CIA payroll, some were on a USIAA payroll, some were on a Special Forces payroll. But in January of '66, we had merged them all onto a Special Forces payroll. And then in my absence, a good fellow named Gordon Huddleston, whose family is coming to visit me next, he's dead now, but his family's coming to see me next week. Gordon Huddleston kind of took over the overall responsibility for this assortment of 70 or 80 people. But then the newly arrived commander of Special Forces decided that he was not going to do those kind of special tasks anymore. He was going to do other things. So just at that point, I came back to do some work with Bob Comer before Colby, and Huddleston saw me and said, "What are we going to do?" So I said, "Okay, we'll take some of them and put them with John Van in 3 Corps, because Van wants to have his own little intel net. We'll put some of them in the Vung Tau Training Center with Win Bae. And some of them, right now, we'll put into what became corps, because Comer is a little bit dependent on me for advice on how to organize and set up things. So we'll call it an evaluations group, that they evaluate the conduct of operations at the district level and below. And
that's the main one. That's the main one.
And they work with experienced Americans like John Libran from Special Forces, Jerry Dodson, who'd been with me before. They work with experienced people and they submit special reports. They don't do routine reporting, they do special reporting. Okay, so then when I came back and I was working with Colby, about 2 years later, I find out that it still exists. And that is generating a lot of significant reporting.
Okay. So that's your main apparatus?
Well, that's one of them, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I see. So you people like Trần Hữu Chí and Do Minh Nhất is actually those persons behind all these files, making up the database.
Many of them, yeah. But once they showed they had an interest in it, then other people became interested too. See, so that the range of those sources from which reports arrived increased. But it began specifically with that group that I put into.
So what's the purpose behind collecting all these, other than accountability for the effort, the pacification?
Initially, what I told Comer is, I said, it's better to know than not to know, because he asked the same question. He said, "What are we going to do with that?" I said, "Well, in the first place, they'll be doing other things as well. They're not just going to be looking at that. But it's better to know than not to know. Secondly, it gives you data with which you can use when you're asking for a replacement.
Well, you just get basically the map of the competence of the South Vietnam, if you have that, because you look at that, at least the transparency of what they're doing and for what purpose. It's very important. As I look at it right now, it's probably the main thing you should look at. It's like the map of the capability of people.
Was very important, and the other thing is, it did not have just to do with issues like corruption or quality of performance. But one of the things I was interested in when I kind of kick-started something like that in the beginning with Comer, pre-Colby, was that I wanted us to be aware of the difference between organizational reporting that would come up from
the top.
District advisors, Americans, and province advisors, versus real-time situational reporting.
Definitely.
And my example at that time was having taken a team with John Librand and Jerry Dodson. It was the Long Hu area, again in Long An province, where the province senior advisor and the province team had reported tremendous success in swinging this area from Liberation Front control to government control. So we three go in there with three of the new evaluators, formerly with me in Special Forces, and we find out that
it wasn't like that at all.
There's still communist presence on Lam Hu Island, that the government presence is restricted to a little area on the northern side of the island, that the regional forces company doesn't go anywhere outside of their little fortress area, that there are not many, but there are a few communist cadre out there in the hamlets, that the roads are still trenched so that government vehicles cannot get down to the other side of the thing. Yeah.
What's the usage out of that? Once when you, in the beginning, you probably have a fuzzy idea of what's going to be using. That's the first question that.
Well, I thought I thought that Comer could use it to insist on enhanced performance.
That's the minimum.
Yeah, that was but I was always looking at minimums, because in the best of circumstances, usually minimums were all you could accomplish in the field. Sorry to say.